Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The revelation unfolded like a thunderclap in the middle of an otherwise ordinary day, a single truth detonating and scattering lives across emotional landscapes they never imagined having to cross, because when the words Amy is Nate's biological mother first left the lips of the geneticist, they were not just a string of syllables, they were the equivalent of a nuclear bomb dropped into the center of a family already walking on the fractured glass of unspoken resentments, broken promises, and years of carefully buried secrets, and the echo of those words filled the sterile testing room, bouncing off its white walls until the silence itself seemed to vibrate, suffocating everyone inside, while Nate stood rooted to the floor, his knees nearly buckling under the weight of the revelation, his eyes darting between Amy, the woman he had always known as a complicated but dependable presence in his orbit, and the man he had called Mom's brother, who until now he believed was simply his uncle, when in truth he had been unknowingly orbiting a web of lies spun so long ago that none of them could untangle it without drawing blood, because Amy, pale and trembling, pressed her trembling hands together as though she could physically hold back the avalanche of explanations threatening to spill from her lips. Explanations about a night she had buried deep in the vault of her memory, explanations about choices that had seemed necessary at the time but now looked cruel in the unforgiving light of this exposure, while Nate's entire childhood flashed before his eyes in dizzying fragments, birthdays where Amy hovered more protectively than any aunt should, scraped knees where she was always the first to arrive, holidays where she sat staring at him with a kind of aching devotion he never understood until now, and suddenly, all of it began to stitch together into a pattern too impossible to ignore, a truth that both clarified and obliterated everything he thought he knew about himself, because if Amy was his mother, then who was the woman he had spent his whole life calling Mom, and what did that make the man who raised him, and what lies had been told, rehearsed, retold, and cemented in place until they became a false reality so convincing that even Nate himself had never thought to question it, and the questions came at him faster than he could process. Was his entire identity built on a performance staged by the adults who should have loved him enough to tell the truth? Was his name even truly his? What did this mean for his sense of belonging? And most of all, how could Amy stand there, tears streaming down her face, and not collapse under the unbearable weight of what she had kept from him for so long, because she was his mother, his real mother, the woman whose blood ran through his veins, the woman who had carried him in her womb, the woman whose heartbeat he had once heard from the inside. And yet she had hidden behind the role of an aunt, a secondary figure in his life, all because of a choice she made decades ago that now demanded its reckoning. And as Amy's lips finally parted, her voice ragged and broken, the story began to spill, the tale of a young girl who had found herself entangled in a forbidden romance, the desperate decision to protect her family's reputation, the shame she had been forced to swallow, and the unbearable compromise of allowing her sister to raise the child she had carried, the son she had birthed, a child she watched grow up under another woman's name, under another woman's rules, and though she was there for every milestone, she was never allowed to claim the title her heart screamed for. And as Nate listened, his world spun further out of control, his memories shifting like puzzle pieces into grotesque new shapes, because every comforting moment of his childhood was now a reminder of deceit, every hug, every lullaby, every reassurance was poisoned by the knowledge that it was all built on a lie. And the silence that followed Amy's confession stretched unbearably, until Nate finally spoke, his voice hoarse and hollow, a single word escaping his lips: why? And that question, more than anything, shattered Amy into 1,000 shards, because she had no answer that could erase the years of betrayal, no explanation that could soothe the pain of a man who had just discovered that the very foundation of his life was built on quicksand. And though she tried, though she begged him to understand that she was young, that she was scared, that she believed she was doing what was best, her words fell like ash between them, dry and lifeless, unable to ignite even the faintest spark of forgiveness, because the damage was already done. And as Nate turned away, his chest tight with grief and rage, Amy reached for him, whispering his name like a prayer, but he pulled back, his entire being recoiling from the touch of the woman who was both everything he thought she wasn't and nothing he thought she was, because in that moment, Nate realized that knowing the truth did not set him free, it imprisoned him in a labyrinth of new questions, new wounds, new Betrayals that would take a lifetime to untangle, if they ever could be untangled at all, and the air in the room remained heavy, almost unbreathable, as 3 lives hung suspended in the unbearable gravity of one truth too big, too messy, and too late to change. The silence that followed Nate's broken why was not a silence at all but a roar, one that lived inside the heart, reverberating through the soul, because to him the world suddenly felt like a hollow stage, the painted backdrops peeling, the lights harsh and merciless, exposing the cruelest kind of reality, that everything he believed about who he was, who had raised him, and where he belonged had been deliberately constructed on a foundation of lies. Amy's tears fell like shattered glass as she tried to speak, but her throat seemed to close, her words coming out in fragments, pitifully small compared to the enormity of what she had withheld. "I was so young, Nate," she whispered, her voice trembling, raw, like a wound reopened. "I didn't know how to raise you. I wasn't ready. They told me it was the best way." And though she spoke, the words felt like smoke, vanishing the moment they reached Nate's ears, because there was no way to make sense of a lifetime of betrayal in a few gasping sentences. His mind was a storm, images flashing too quickly to process, the woman he called his mother braiding his hair, telling him stories at night, standing proudly at his school plays, all of it crumbling, all of it reframed by this new truth, that she wasn't his mother at all, not by blood. That Amy, the one who had hovered near, always close, always with an intensity he never understood, had been silently screaming the truth in her heart while masking it with smiles, with an aunt's affection that was, in fact, a mother's agony. And the weight of that unspoken truth pressed down on him now like a coffin lid, threatening to suffocate him. Amy's mind spun backward as she tried to explain, desperate to paint the picture of who she had been when this tragedy began. She had been only 17, a girl carrying more dreams than wisdom, her world split between her desire for freedom and the crushing expectations of her family. Then came the mistake, or perhaps the love affair, that altered everything. She had fallen for someone forbidden, someone her parents would never have approved of, someone whose name still carried the power to make her chest tighten even decades later. When the pregnancy was discovered, her world imploded. Her parents raged, her community whispered, and Amy herself, terrified and ashamed, was backed into a corner. Her older sister, already married, already secure, was chosen as the solution. "She'll raise him," their parents decreed, their voices cold and absolute. "She'll give him the life you can't. And no one will ever know." Amy had fought at first, had cried and screamed and begged to keep her child, but she was young, powerless, crushed under the weight of her family's decision. And so, after the birth, after she held Nate for the first time, after she memorized every inch of his tiny face with the desperation of someone who knew she might never have another chance, she was forced to hand him over. That memory haunted her every day, carved into her like a brand. She had watched her sister carry him home, watched her parents beam with relief at the preservation of their family's image, while Amy herself was relegated to the role of aunt, a title that felt like a blade twisting in her heart every time Nate called her by it. She raised him in shadows, loving him fiercely but silently, watching him grow without ever being allowed to claim him. Every time she kissed his cheek, every time she patched a scraped knee, every time she stood in the bleachers at his games, she whispered to herself the truth she was forbidden to speak: "That's my son." But now, decades later, the truth had escaped the chains that bound it, and Amy's confession hung in the air like smoke from a fire that would not die. Nate stared at her, his body trembling with a mixture of rage, grief, and disbelief. "You let me live a lie," he hissed finally, his voice like broken glass. "You watched me call someone else mom. You let me believe I belonged to her. His voice cracked, and he had to swallow hard to continue. "You were right there, Amy. Right there. And you never told me. Not once. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To know that your whole life, your whole identity, was stolen from you?" His words cut into her like knives, but she didn't flinch. She didn't try to defend herself. She only nodded, tears streaming freely, because she knew he was right. She had stolen something precious from him, even if her intent had been to protect him. Meanwhile, the woman who raised Nate, the one he had called mom for 30 years, sat silently in the corner, her face pale, her hands twisting in her lap. She had been complicit in the lie, but she too had loved Nate fiercely. To her, he was her son, even if not by blood. But how could she explain that love now without sounding like a thief caught with stolen treasure? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words died, her voice choking on guilt. Nate glanced at her once, his eyes burning with betrayal, and that single look cut her more deeply than any words ever could. The ripple effect of this revelation didn't stop in that room. It stretched outward, threatening to consume the entire family. Cousins who weren't cousins. Uncles who were something else entirely. Every relationship, every bond was being rewritten in real time. The family tree itself seemed to tremble, its branches twisting, its roots pulling free from the earth. And in the middle of it stood Nate, a man unmoored, his sense of self fractured into pieces too sharp to hold. He stormed out of the testing facility, the doors slamming behind him, his chest heaving as he tried to breathe through the chaos in his mind. The city outside looked different, foreign, as though someone had painted over it in harsher colors. He wanted to run, to keep running until the truth couldn't reach him, but there was no outrunning blood, no outrunning the sound of Amy's voice whispering, "I'm your mother." He staggered down the street, memories slicing through him, Amy brushing his hair back when he was sick, Amy's smile too wide at his high school graduation, Amy crying at his college acceptance letter, and all of it was tainted now, poisoned by what he knew. Amy, meanwhile, collapsed into a chair inside the clinic, her body racked with sobs. For decades she had carried this secret like a stone in her chest, and now that it was out, she realized the truth wasn't liberating, it was devastating. She had thought, foolishly, that maybe Nate would understand. That maybe, after the initial pain, he would see that she had loved him all along, that she had done the best she could under impossible circumstances. But the look in his eyes told her otherwise. To him, she wasn't a mother. She was a liar. And that truth broke her more than anything. The days that followed were a blur of tension and silence. Nate didn't return calls. He didn't answer the door. He sat in his apartment alone, drinking too much, staring at old photographs that now looked like evidence in a crime scene. Amy tried once, standing outside his door for hours, begging him to open up, to let her explain, but he never did. Inside, he sat with his back against the door, listening to her cry, torn between wanting to let her in and wanting to erase her from his life forever. But family secrets have a way of bleeding outward. Soon, other relatives learned the truth, and the family fractured into camps, those who defended Amy, insisting she had been young and forced into an impossible situation, and those who condemned her, declaring that no amount of youth or pressure justified deceiving a child about his very identity. Gatherings turned into battlefields. Old resentments resurfaced. The family, once proud of their closeness, now found themselves divided by a secret that had been buried too long. And yet, beneath the chaos, something fragile remained, a connection between Nate and Amy that, no matter how poisoned, no matter how fragile, could not be severed entirely. Blood bound them, whether he wanted it or not. In his darkest hours, when he closed his eyes, he remembered the way she had looked at him all his life, with a love too intense for an aunt. He remembered her arms around him when he was heartbroken, her laughter when he made a joke, her pride when he succeeded. And he hated himself for remembering, hated himself for acknowledging the truth of that love. Because if he accepted it, if he admitted it even for a moment, it meant admitting that part of him still saw her as what she had always been, what she could never say, his mother. The days that followed the revelation stretched into an agonizing blur, each hour dragging like a stone tied around Nate's neck. He had thought betrayal would feel sharp, a quick and fatal wound, but instead it was a slow suffocation, a poison working through every corner of his life, draining him of the ability to trust, to believe, to even remember without doubt gnawing at him. He locked himself away, ignoring work, ignoring friends, ignoring every call that came from Amy or the woman he had once called Mom. His phone buzzed relentlessly, voicemails piling up like accusations. Amy's voice trembled through the recordings, "Nate, please, just talk to me. Let me explain. Let me fix this." And then the softer, steadier voice of his adoptive mother, the woman he had once trusted above all others. "Honey, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But don't shut us out. Don't shut me out." But Nate couldn't answer. Every word from them felt like salt in an open wound. The walls of his apartment closed in, plaster suffocating, the photographs on his shelves mocking him. Pictures of birthdays, family vacations, graduations, moments captured with smiles that now felt grotesque, like masks painted over lies. He had stared for hours at one photo in particular, himself at 8 years old, standing between Amy and the woman he had called Mom, both women with their hands resting proudly on his shoulders. At the time, it had been comfort. Now, it was a crime scene. Two women smiling at a boy who had no idea he was living in a performance staged for his benefit. His stomach churned every time his eyes landed on it, yet he couldn't bring himself to tear it down. At last, after nearly a week of self-imposed exile, Nate's anger boiled into something else: demand for confrontation. He couldn't stay silent, couldn't keep drowning in the questions clawing at him. He needed answers, not half-truths, not rehearsed justifications, but the raw, unvarnished truth. He called his adoptive mother first, his voice flat, cold. "We need to talk," he said. She agreed instantly, relief evident in her tone, though it did nothing to ease his fury. They met at the family home, the house Nate had grown up in, the house whose walls contained every memory now twisted by betrayal. Stepping through the doorway felt like walking into a stranger's life. Every corner of the home was familiar, yet every detail screamed falsehood. The photographs on the mantelpiece, the childhood trophies lined up on shelves, the sofa where he had once snuggled between his parents to watch movies, all of it belonged to a version of Nate who no longer existed. His mother, no, the woman who raised him, sat in her armchair, hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale with dread. She looked older, frilier than he had ever seen her, as though the truth had stolen years from her in a matter of days. "Sit down, Nate," she said softly. He remained standing, arms crossed over his chest, glaring at her with eyes that no longer held warmth. "I don't want your rehearsed lines," he spat. "I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. All of it. Right now." She flinched at his tone but nodded, her lips trembling. "You deserve that," she admitted. "You've always deserved the truth." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she began. "It wasn't my idea, Nate. It was your grandparents'. When Amy got pregnant, they decided the only way to protect the family, to protect her future, was for me to raise you. I didn't fight them. I should have, but I didn't. Because I wanted you. God forgive me, I wanted you so badly. Your father and I had been trying for years, and we couldn't." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her chest. "When they handed you to me, you were everything I had ever prayed for. And I told myself I could make it right, that love would be enough, that you didn't need to know the truth. But love built on lies." She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "It was never fair to you. I know that. I know it every time I look at you now." Nate's chest heaved as her words sank in. "So I was what? A consolation prize? A convenient fix for everyone's problems? You just went along with it, like I was a thing to be passed around?" His voice rose with every sentence, until it echoed through the house that once held his laughter. "You were never a thing to me," she said desperately, rising to her feet, her hands shaking. "You were my son in every way that mattered. I changed your diapers, I stayed up with you when you had nightmares, I taught you to ride a bike, I sat up all night when you had the flu. I loved you, Nate. Every single day of your life, I loved you. That love was real, no matter what your blood says." Her words pierced him, not because they soothed, but because they reminded him of everything he had lost. He wanted to scream that her love wasn't enough, that it couldn't erase the lies, that it had stolen his right to know the truth of his own identity. But another part of him, small and stubborn, couldn't deny the memories of her tenderness, the years of devotion she had poured into him. It was that contradiction, the undeniable love wrapped in betrayal, that twisted his insides into knots. Before he could respond, the door opened, and Amy stepped inside. She froze when she saw him, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. "Nate," she whispered, almost like a prayer. His jaw clenched, his entire body tensing. "You don't get to say my name like that," he snapped. "Not after everything." But Amy stepped forward anyway, her voice breaking. "I know you hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to understand, I never stopped loving you. Every second of your life, I loved you. I wanted to scream the truth every time you called me Aunt Amy, every time you hugged me and pulled away too quickly because you thought I was just family, not your mother. It killed me, Nate. It killed me every single day."